So let's take a look at Genesis chapter 34. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel, and spake kindly unto the damsel. And Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to commune with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel, lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. This is a horrible thing that has taken place, and Dinah's brothers, Jacob's sons, they are incredibly displeased with this. They become very wroth. And if you remember, that exact same phrase was used last week when Cain killed his brother. He was very wroth. And so what happens next is these brothers, angry about what this man had done, they work out a plan of revenge. Hamor, Shechem's father, the father of the man that's done this to their sister, tries to convince them, listen, give me Dinah as a wife to my son. And in verse 12 he says, Ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as ye shall say unto me, but give me the damsel and a wife. He said, listen, whatever price you set, I'll pay it. Verse 13, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said to him, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that will reproach. But in this we will consent unto you, if you will be as we are, if you will follow the Jewish rite as we have, if you will do what we have done, then we will give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. Verse 18 tells us, incredibly, Hamor and Shechem agree to this deal. They make this contract. Verse 19 tells us that Shechem, the young man, deferred not to do the thing because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. Now think about what it just said. The young man that took Dinah and defiled her, but he was more honorable than everyone in the house. The guy who did this horrible thing, that he was the most honorable person in the house. And then Shechem and his father go and they convince all of the men of the city to follow this Jewish rite of passage. And they do it. They tell them, listen, if you will do this thing, then they will be one people with us, and we'll be able to take their land, we'll be able to take their cattle, we'll be able to take their things. Verse 25. So the entire city has followed this Jewish passage. Verse 25 says, And it came to pass on the third day when they were sore, that the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all of the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have troubled me to make me stink among the inhabitants of the land. He says, my reputation is ruined, guys. They're going to come upon me and slay me. What we have here in this passage is something horrible happens to Dinah. And Simeon and Levi and the other sons of Jacob, their other brothers, they put together a pretty deceptive plan to take revenge. And probably this evening you can identify with the idea that most of the time when you lose your temper, it's because of what someone else did. Right? Because of what someone else did to you. You didn't start it. Just like kids who get in a fight, they're quick to say, I didn't start it, he started it. When we think about our anger and times we've lost our temper, we're quick to say, well, they started it. They're the ones that caused this. You see, a major portion of the sins we commit in anger are not in our actions, but they're in our reactions. They're not in our actions, but they're in our reactions. They're in the way that we react to what someone else has done. In today's passage, we see that Jacob's two sons took matters into their own hands, and they got revenge. And if I'm honest, a part of me when I read this story says, good for them. They stood up for their sister. They made sure that their sister wasn't taken advantage of. They did something about it. If you take a moment, you can probably think of some other great revenge stories. Stories that you appreciate because the bad guy got what was coming to him. That the person who took advantage of someone got what they deserved. We love a good revenge story because there's something in us that cries for justice and fairness. There's something within us that says, that can't stay that way. That needs to be made right. Let me give you a story from our recent news. Anthony Stockelman was convicted of killing a little girl named Katie. She was 10 years old. He kidnapped her, he abused her, and he killed her. He was placed in the Wabash Correctional Facility, not far from us here in Indiana. But what the Department of Corrections of Indiana didn't realize is that they had placed him in a cell block with a cousin of Katie's. And Katie's cousin made his way into Anthony Stockelman's jail cell. Legend has it, there's no testimony to this effect, but legend has it that he says, you can either face the same thing that Katie faced, or you're going to let me give you a tattoo. And the next morning when Stockelman came down to breakfast, he had Katie's revenge tattooed across his face. That day forward, he would always be known as, that's the guy that killed Katie. Somehow a picture of Stockelman with this new tattoo written across his forehead was leaked and was put on the news. And people loved that story because they loved the idea of someone taking revenge out on this man. And in all of us, there's this desire to see people who have done wrong get what's coming to them. Especially if they've done something wrong to someone that we care about, someone that's close to us. There's this desire for justice that things will be made right. Recently, I heard a report on road rage. And one of the things that fuels road rage so much is that when someone cuts you off or someone blocks everyone in an intersection because they don't want to wait for the next green light, the thing that infuriates people is the idea that they're going to get away with this, right? This person is a horrible person. They drive in a way that endangers other people, and they're just getting away with it. Someone has got to teach them a lesson. Someone needs to make this right. You see, the first thing I want you to get a hold of about this revenge story is that Shechem had sinned against Dinah, and he deserved punishment. What he did was wrong. Many times the reasons that we are angry are justifiable reasons. There are some things that we are justified in being upset about. Simeon and Levi, Jacob, they had reason to be upset with Shechem. Here this guy had taken their sister, Jacob's daughter. She's a damsel. We think she's probably between the ages of 14 and 16. He sees her hanging out with some of her friends in the city. He wants her, so he takes her. Shechem is a prince. Most likely he's lived a life where anytime he sees something that he wants, he takes it, he gets it. Later on, he goes to his father and says, "Get this woman for me as a wife. I want to keep her." So he takes her and he defiles her. The passage makes it clear that he only falls in love with her after he's done this. This wasn't about love. This was about lust. Dinah was most likely very ashamed. She was confused. She probably felt trapped. The passage tells us that Shechem takes Dinah home. He's taken her home. She's stuck there at his house. Nothing's been worked out with her family. This Shechem guy was a punk who needed to be dealt with. What he had done was wrong. And when he goes to his father, Hamor, he says, "Get this woman for me as a wife." His father doesn't correct him or rebuke him. His father just plays in to his way of thinking and the way that he's doing things. Remember, I pointed out that phrase there in the verse that Shechem was one of the more honorable people in his home. Shechem grew up in a pretty rough family, apparently. He didn't know anything differently than what he was doing. His family, this is the way that they operated. They took what they wanted. Our world is full of Shechems and Hamors. Our world is full of people who are in powerful positions taking advantage of others. You and I don't have to look far to find someone that the playing field really needs to be evened on them. You and I don't have to look far to see someone who's taking power and using it corruptly to take advantage of the weak. You and I don't have to look far to see someone that we would very much cheer for if we heard in the news that they got what was coming to them. Shechem and Hamor, these are guys that you root for to get what's coming to them by the end of the movie. And so reading this, part of you hopes, man, someone's got to deal with this guy. So they come to Jacob, Dinah's father. They say, "Listen, this is what's going on." And Jacob fails to respond at all. He doesn't do anything. Verse 5 says, his sons were in the field, so he didn't do anything. Apparently Jacob wanted to wait to confer with his sons, or he was afraid to act without his sons as backup. His hesitation only contributed to the problem, though. It becomes pretty clear that Jacob's main concern is himself. And for whatever reason, whether it was because he was afraid or if he was unsure of what to do, his inaction only pours gasoline on this fire. See, when an appropriate response to difficult situations isn't modeled by leadership, others will be tempted to take matters into their own hands. When leadership doesn't show this is the right way to handle this situation, other people are going to take matters into their own hands. Something horrible has happened. Jacob should have been the one to handle it, and he doesn't. So his sons, Dinah's brothers, they say, we're going to do something about this. Now, the passage says that his sons are out in the field, and I don't want you to think that they were just like 30 minutes away. Because there's a good chance that when they're in the field with their flocks, they're a day's journey away. They're in the highlands, or they're in the plateau where there's plenty of grassy area for all their flocks. When we read about Joseph going to find his brother 3 chapters later in Genesis 37, it was a trip for him to go find them. And so when they are told that they need to come home because something has happened to Dinah and they hear what has taken place, they're on their way home and they're coming up with a plan of how they're going to settle the score here. But I want you to think about Jacob. I think Simeon and Levi felt like they had to take matters into their own hands because Jacob is concerned about himself. Jacob is one of the patriarchs in the Jewish faith, but the patriarchs weren't necessarily good men. You look at the life of Jacob, and he was constantly being deceitful and playing favorites. Jacob married Leah and Rachel, who were sisters. He was married to sisters, and he clearly favored one over the other. He loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. The reason that he ended up being married to Leah is because his father-in-law tricked him into marrying Leah. He not only preferred Rachel to Leah, he preferred Rachel's children to Leah's children. This is a very messed up, dysfunctional family unit. Jacob wasn't doing what was best for his children. He was constantly doing what was best for himself. And I'm sure that there was something in Simeon and Levi that said, if this was Rachel's daughter, Jacob would have done something. If this is one of Dad's favorite kids, this would have already been handled. But because it's our sister, he's not doing anything. And this dysfunction that's been going on in this family, it's probably just fueling this fire. Simeon and Levi have grown up in a family where you've had to take care of your blood relatives. Make sure that your whole brothers and sisters are looked after because your father prefers your half-brothers and sisters. They've watched their father be deceptive with their grandfather and with their uncle. And what Simeon and Levi do later in this passage, they're just carrying out the deception that their father taught them. See, most of us, we learned how to deal with our anger from our parents. And I know that you probably didn't want to hear that. Right? But we've all been there, right? We've said something, done something, and gone, oh my goodness, I'm my father, or I am my mother. And when you look at what Simeon and Levi do here, it's really hard to not see the fingerprints of Jacob. This lie that they put together, this deception that they pull on Hamor and Shechem and the entire city, this is something that Jacob would come up with. Something that he would do. And it's pretty incredible that even though Jacob scolds Simeon and Levi in verse 30, we never see him discipline them. Now, just think about that, okay? Genesis 34, Simeon and Levi kill an entire city. And I mean, from what we see in Scripture, they weren't grounded. They weren't punished. All right? And I mean, I don't know how strict you are as a parent, but if your kids kill a city, probably should come down pretty hard. So, because Jacob doesn't do anything, should we be surprised at all that 3 chapters later in Genesis 37 that the sons of Jacob, led by their oldest brother Simeon and Levi, kidnap their own brother and sell him into slavery in Egypt? These are the same guys. God would discipline Simeon and Levi for this and for their sins against Joseph. Their tribes would be punished. They would receive punishment through the years. But Jacob seems to be just paralyzed with, I'm not sure what's going to be best for me in this situation. So because Jacob doesn't respond at all, Simeon and Levi respond inappropriately. Jacob didn't act, so Simeon and Levi do. And Simeon and Levi deceive the people of Shechem. The people of Shechem, the city of Shechem, which the prince who defiled Dinah is named after, they are convinced through the opportunity, the promise of financial gain, that hey, listen, we're going to go through this Jewish rite of circumcision. We're going to become a people with them. They're going to trade their flocks with us. We're going to get all this stuff. And I'm sure that this city was a group of pretty rough people. Maybe you say, well, you know what? These people, they get what's coming to them. We need to remember that it is never right to do wrong in order to do right. It is never right to do wrong in order to do right. Hey, you know what? If you rob a bank and you give half of the money to church, that's still robbery. Hey, if you lie on your taxes and you give that extra to charity, you give that extra money to help the poor and needy, it's still wrong. And it's never right for us to do the wrong thing so that we can do some right thing. And for Simeon and Levi to lie, for them to kill, it was not right. No matter what else had been done, this was not right. Simeon and Levi, they wait until the third day when the people would have been the most sore. I mean, this is a dirty trick. People are unable to defend themselves. And they come upon the city with their swords and they kill all of the men. They don't kill just Shechem and Hamor. They don't just kill the men that defiled their sister and his dad who's tried to buy her. They kill every man in the city. And then they took all of their cattle. And then they took all of their possessions. And then they took their families. And they spoiled or wrecked everything else that they left behind. You see, revenge is very rarely a measured response. Revenge is rarely something that we do with the appropriate measure of the wrong that was done to us. They didn't just kill Shechem. They didn't just kill Hamor. They killed everybody. They didn't just kill them all. They took their families. They didn't just take their families. They took their cattle. They didn't just take all of their stuff. They wrecked their homes behind them. You know what I see here in Simeon and Levi? I see them out of their minds with rage. And think about the forethought that went into this plan. The fact that they waited 3 whole days for these people to be the absolute most sore that they possibly could. So they would be at their weakest stake and they could attack them. You're probably familiar with that phrase, revenge is a dish best served cold. Right? And the idea there is that the longer you wait, they don't see it coming. Simeon and Levi, they waited. And that anger, they were very wroth. That anger just rolled and it broiled. And when the time came, they went berserk. You see, because revenge is rarely a measured response, revenge is not justice. It might feel like justice, but it's not justice. And because it might feel like justice while it's not justice, in the Old Testament, God had established a means so that unbiased, uninvolved judges could rule. When God sets up the nation of Israel, He sets it up where there are cities of refuge. Cities of refuge where if you and I are working in a field and I swing an axe and I lose control of it, it hits you in the head and it kills you. It looks like I killed you. I could run to the city of refuge and that city will protect my life until the judge can rule on what happened, whether or not it was an accident or it was murder. God wasn't just let the family decide right there in the field what needed to happen, because He knew it would be impossible to have an impartial decision in that moment. You see, when we are angry, we fail to see things in a proper perspective. We have a bias. We have partiality. You want to see partiality at work? You want to see bias at work? Go to a basketball game between two Christian schools. All right? I attended Christian high school. Played on the basketball team. Some of the most scary situations I've ever been in my life were in gyms, playing an away game, and the ref makes the wrong call, or what the other team thinks is the wrong call. And I mean, if anybody's ever been on the same team, these two schools should be on the same team. But man, everybody loses it. Because from their perspective, the call was wrong, or the call was right, or it's unfair. In situations where things are much, the stakes are much higher than some high school basketball game, our bias comes into play. And when we're angry, we struggle even more to see things from the proper perspective. We have partiality. God knew that justice could only be served by people not directly involved in the situation. What Jacob should have done is he should have found a daysman. Job speaks of a daysman. A daysman was someone that you could go and get, someone that was impartial to either party and could rule in the situation. A daysman could work things out. That's what should have happened here. But instead they used deception to take revenge. Romans 12:19 says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." And when we take revenge ourselves, when we take matters into our own hands, what we are saying is, I don't think God is going to handle this one. I need to handle it myself. God clearly hasn't taught this person a lesson. I need to teach them. If we're really delusional, we'll come to the point where we say, I am the revenge that God wants to bring upon this person. See, taking matters in our own hands is a failure to trust God. That He's going to handle the situation. That He is going to make all wrongs right. Now, let's not lose sight of the fact that what Simeon and Levi did was just incredibly violent and wrong, but what had been done to their sister was horrible. And some of you here, you've experienced things have been done to you that are just absolutely wrong. You were sinned against, and the person who sinned against you deserves punishment. Your anger is justified. But just because your anger is justified, that doesn't mean that your actions will be justified. Just because your emotions are justified doesn't mean that your response or your reaction will be justified. Leave that in the Lord's hands. Trust me, He knows better what should be done. You got to trust Him with it. I mentioned earlier that Job referred to a daysman when Job referred to a daysman, he said, "Oh, that there was a daysman who could come between me and God, who could argue my case before God, who could come halfway between me and God," basically. And friends, we have that daysman in Christ. Christ is the one who argues our case to the Lord. He is the one that defends us. He is the one that takes our cries, our prayers, our complaints to the Lord. He is that one who has come between us to act between us and God. I want you to know that you do have an impartial judge in the Lord that you can call out to. And not only do you have an impartial judge in the Lord that you can call out to, He has powers above any other court in the land to bring about the appropriate punishment, response, reaction to the sins done against you. You know there are people that have committed horrible crimes that we know who committed, we have evidence that they committed them, and our courts are unable to prosecute them. We're unable to arrest them. We're unable to find them, to capture them. But there is no one who is able to flee the jurisdiction of our God. There is no one who is able to find a loophole in God's law. He is the great judge. And He says, "Vengeance is mine." When Paul said that in Romans 12, he was actually quoting Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy says this, "To me belong vengeance and recompense. In due time their feet will slip, because their time of calamity is near, and the things prepared for them draw near." Do you get that? In due time. I think the thing that's hard for us, the thing that pushes us, that we want to take matters into our own hands, is that we don't see anything happen. That's why Simeon and Levi acted, right? They didn't see their father doing anything. And that's the reason that you and I are tempted to act, because we don't see God doing anything. What He said in Deuteronomy is, in due time. And He closes it with, "The things prepared for them will draw near." Do not confuse our inability to see what God is doing or what His work is doing. Do not confuse that with inaction. God is working. And you and I may not be able to see it, but He is working. Simeon and Levi didn't see their father doing anything because he wasn't doing anything. You and I, sometimes we don't feel like we see God doing anything. That doesn't mean He's not doing anything. In due time, their feet will slip, and the things prepared for them will draw nigh. When I watch the news and I see some corrupt, powerful man taking advantage of the weak, I want there to be justice. When you read of atrocities in a place like Uganda, where children are kidnapped and forced by threat of danger to their families to fight, I want there to be justice. But God says, in due time their feet will slip, and the things that I have prepared for them will come nigh. God is going to recompense evil. We need to trust His timing and His word. Because when Shechem sinned against Dinah, Shechem sinned against Dinah's God. Shechem sinned against the Lord. And if the Lord, who through His Son Jesus told us that a sparrow doesn't fall from a tree without God noticing, He's going to notice those things that are done unto His children. He's going to see When Dinah was taken advantage of, that didn't go under God's radar. He saw, he knew. When atrocities happen in this world, God knows, he sees. When we are wronged, God knows, he sees. Trust him. Trust him. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer.